My name is Matt Widener, and I'm your code enforcement attorney. I work with cities and counties across the state of Florida to help them do code enforcement right. The reason why I'm so passionate about this work is code enforcement departments are your community's most underutilized and underappreciated department. They've got the greatest ability to do good work for your community. Unfortunately, they're just kind of overlooked too often. But code enforcement has a place in public safety. Code enforcement has a place in economic development. Public safety, economic development, and housing. Code enforcement has a seat at the table at housing as well. Code enforcement critically plays a function in improving the quality of life for citizens all across the state. But unfortunately, again, they're vastly underappreciated, underutilized. And so my mission here is to help elected officials in particular recognize the value of departments and elevate those departments and start really paying attention to them. And one of the critical things here, and this is a mind blower for me, is cities and communities across the state are owed literally billions of dollars, billions with a B. I say this because in the research that I've gone through and looked at departments, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in some counties and cities in recorded liens that are owed to taxpayers. Key part of my mission is convincing elected officials that you have an absolute duty and an obligation to start collecting that money and using that money to serve the citizens. Now, the most important case that comes out in code enforcement ever, but it's certainly in the last decade, is this case Ficken versus City of Dunedin. A guy called James Ficken sues the City of Dunedin and claims that the procedures that Dunedin is using are unfair. And I'm sharing on my screen here the case. It's filed in 2019. This is the amended complaint. But the bottom line here is this Institute for Justice, and I'll drop a link in for them because it's really important that you look at it, understand what Institute of Justice is looking at, and compare your policies and procedures to what they are accusing and attacking departments of to make sure, because there are some lessons in there that we should be paying attention to. But the bottom line is this. In their own complaint, they say that the code enforcement practices can result in fines that reach into tens of thousands of dollars. I'm like, absolutely correct. It says that if you don't pay those fines, foreclosure can be resolved. Yes, that's absolutely correct. There is no cap. Yes, that's correct. And then finally, they articulate that the practices violate the excessive fines clause of the U.S. and Florida constitutions. Now, we'll tell you that the federal court and the appellate court just absolutely eviscerated, blew away, threw that argument away, and we'll get to the detail in a minute. But the bottom line is this. This opinion, this case, serves as a calling card to departments to say that you have to more effectively manage your cases and engage in active code enforcement. Now, one of the things that we need to focus on, of course, is what is code enforcement? Well, their complaint says this. Code enforcement, the stated purpose is to help property owners achieve voluntary compliance. That is our job, folks. And right there in the complaint of the plaintiff here, he says that. But you need to put that as part of your procedures, and you need to make sure that that's a foundation of everything that you do every single day, every single employee, up to leadership. Should be on the website as it is here. You see here, the city's website advises that often a simple phone call will help to take care of things. And yes, folks, that's what we should be focused on. Get a little pointer out here. But the other thing is the procedures to resolve things should be easy. Here, the city should have an ability to make a phone call and make things go away. And if not, you got to be strong and you got to be aggressive and go in there and take care of things. Now, the reason why this case is so important for you to study as part of your in-service trainings, as part of your meetings, we sit down with lawyers as well going through this case, is because the case really lays out procedures that should be followed. You're tracking 162 and comparing the municipal code and making sure that it lines up correctly. Here we got another thing. The city manager and the city attorney talk about it's a perfect way to deal with foreclosed properties and nuisance properties. And the city appreciates the revenue that comes from this. Here's the deal, folks. Far too often, code enforcement liens are treated as, quote, monopoly money, right? We don't think that we can actually enforce them. Well, they don't do the parking tickets, right? We don't treat speeding tickets as monopoly money. We shouldn't be treating code enforcement violations as monopoly money because they're not, particularly when we're dealing with hard cost fines, special assessments, and things like that. In any event, one of the primary violations in this case, and I think why this one became the focus of attention, is the repeat violator thing. Need to be tight with those procedures, make sure the notices are out and that you're being real clear about what repeat violator is. But the bottom line is this. This guy had a property and it went for at least 48 days without the grass being mowed. Well, again, let's talk about what code enforcement is. Code enforcement is requiring individuals to be clear about their responsibilities to neighboring property owners, to the community at large, and take care of their properties. And if you're not going to do it, if you're going to let your grass go for 48 days in a nice community that has neighbors that don't want this, you may be subject to violations in a code enforcement case. And that's what happened here. And when the guy didn't take care of it over and over again, they keep bringing it in front of code board and the fines are assessed. At the end of the day, the appellate court rules in this beautiful 61-page long opinion here and says critically that the fines that were levied are appropriate. And for every department across the state, this 61-page opinion is really important because it empowers you. In fact, I think it requires you to more effectively operate your departments, right? Because this opinion says the legislature, when they passed Chapter 162 and they established these fines in the permissible values, that empowers local code enforcement boards to levy and assess those fines. And once you have this opinion now and you listen to the rationale of it, you just got to go, well, you know what, that's right. They're telling us that when the legislature passed something, the ability to have a code enforcement board, and the legislature articulated fines and penalties and enforcement, you have a duty and an obligation to fulfill and pursue those things. Now, throughout this opinion, I think it's so interesting, 61 pages long, over and over again, the court articulates things that I'll call sort of the dog ate my homework thing, right? Ficken's complaining that he couldn't do the lawn because travel opportunities were constrained. And then another one that his mom was sick or something and he couldn't take care of her. And then here again that the lawnmower was broken. But all of these things over and over again, dog ate my homework. This is why I couldn't mow the grass and fulfill my obligations to the community. Of course, we want to be responsive. If somebody's got real problems, we want to work with them. And I know code enforcement departments do, because again, voluntary compliance and working with people is the foundation of everything that we do. But when people just won't comply, you have to do something to get their attention. That's what the code enforcement board does. But again, when you read this opinion carefully, what you see is exceptional records and exceptional communication of the code enforcement department and to the violator. Written emails, texts, phones, records, and things like this about how the code enforcement officers and department are telling this guy, hey, you got to take care of this. The court made pains to make it clear that the guy didn't even attend the hearing. Well, he knew about it, but he didn't attend the hearing. Court had a problem with that, of course. There's another one here. Ficken admitted the violation, but disputed the non-compliance. He says, again, that, again, back to the dog ate my homework stuff, attending to the mother, lawnmower malfunction, the lawnmower halted during season. He got a new mower here, a stronger, reliable mower. But again, 2018, Ficken did not attend the hearing, nor did anyone attend the hearing. So again, the court has a problem with that. Gee whiz, you didn't even attend these lower court hearings in code enforcement board, and yet you file a case in federal court claiming that your due process rights were violated. This emphasizes an important thing about why your records are so important. Notice, notice, notice. You need to make sure that you get good notice to the violator, not just the notice that's required under 162, mailing to the address, but things like emails, things like text messages, Facebook, phone calls. Over and over again, you should be providing notice and keeping good records of those. There's one thing, one of the critical vulnerabilities and things that I wish departments would do would have better software. There's good software out there that allows departments to keep good copies of all these records. One of the things that made this case difficult was putting all those records together, all those notices, all that stuff. If you have a proper software system that keeps all this stuff together and it's all documented properly, it's easy. You just hit send and there's all the records and notices to everybody. So that's a big call to action. Get software and get it done correctly. But the bottom line is this, the federal court here said that the $500 fine for daily and the aggregate fines of $29,000 was not at all a violation. It did not, in fact, shock the conscience. Those numbers, those amounts were specifically authorized by statute, and the city was well within their rights to do it. Again, the reason why this is important, this case is important, is it allows you to look at the way your procedures operate. Do your municipal code track 162 and the procedures that are required? Things like repeat violators. Do you track 162 and apply the conditions that allow you to establish repeat violator? Down to conduct of the proceedings. Keep in mind that a code enforcement proceeding is a formal court proceeding. Do you have proper notice? Do you take testimony the way you should? Do you keep records the way you should? And if you do, you keep a good record that will protect you. The case is chock-a-block here with lessons for departments, and I encourage departments to print up all these documents, hand them to your officers, have it part of your in-service. I'd love to come and do in-person in-service and talk about it with officers, or jump into a Zoom call with anybody or a Zoom meeting and lay out why this case is important and the lesson that it gives you. But another one of the most important points, the second most important point or case in all code enforcement is Kirby versus City Archer. Stands for the proposition that once you go through the time and trouble of a code enforcement board meeting and you issue a fine, levy a fine, if they don't appeal it within 30 days, it's over, Johnny. You can't be coming back and complaining that the dog ate my homework, the code enforcement officer lied, whatever.
But you have appointments soon.
Kirby tells us that once it's final, once it hadn't been appealed, it's final. Over and over again, the violator here, Ficken, claims that due process violations occurred. But if you provide notice and there's an opportunity to be heard, what this case tells us is there are no due process violations. Here, again, over and over again through this opinion, the judge pulls out the evidence that the city presented, that they had communicated with these guys. Even here, this is interesting. These communications between the code enforcement officer and the violator didn't provide, quote, formal notice of the meeting, but they did really firmly establish that the department was going above and beyond to communicate with this guy. And I think the court looked at that and said, wait a minute, you can't claim that you didn't have due process protections when you don't even bother to show up to the hearing. And then over and over again, the city's providing these evidence that a delivery receipt signed by Jay Ficken and an affidavit of service signed by the officer saying that he sent the notice to the violator. And this guy comes into federal court claiming that he didn't have any notice of it. But again, over and over again, the records provided by the city demonstrate that the notice of repeat violation was sent and that notice was complied with. If you get nothing else right, make sure you get notice correct. Here we have more, again, evidence that the addresses were sent, the violation notices were sent, but the violator decided not to pay any attention to it. So the court had a real problem with that, as they should. So back to evidence. Make sure you keep careful copy of all the records. Over and over again, the due process violations fail because notice was provided. Again, I could just go over and over again with that. But back to the fundamental violations here, where the second part were alleging that the cumulative fines, the $500 a day, the $250 violated or shocked the conscience because it was so high, and that's just not true. Finally, fast forward to July 14th, 2022, they appealed that. The appellate court in rocket ship time, record time, issues a final opinion that says that the unconstitutionality arguments fail because adequate notice was provided, the fines were not unconstitutionally excessive, and in fact were authorized by statute. They go in, of course, to a lot of detail about how the notice was appropriate and about how all of his due process rights were protected. And again, back to this argument that the heavy fines were not appropriate. The appellate court just rejects that because they found that the that the $500 a day or $250 a day is authorized by statute. Folks, the call to action is this. You've got fines, they run, you've got the statutory authority to enforce that. You've got a duty and an obligation to enforce your fines, to collect the billions of dollars that's owed to taxpayers. And what Ficken tells us is you've got a responsibility to do that and do it in an effective way in what I call active code enforcement. That means first and foremost, know the total dollar value of liens that are owed. Know how long they go back. To the extent that there is a good lesson here, it's this. Don't let fines just run on forever. Don't engage in what I call file and forget, where you open a case, you record a lien. It's $250 a day, it's $500 a day, and it sits there and goes on for years or decades even. That's the big lesson from Ficken. That's just not appropriate anymore. And in this day and age, that's the singular most important thing I want to take from this is that you as a code enforcement department have a duty and an obligation to understand what your liens are and enforce those liens in a timely manner. The second most important point, you got to have software that allows you to keep the notices, to keep the communications that you've had, that properly documents the case and allows you to effectively manage the docket. If you want to do an in-service training on this, you got questions about this case, please give me a call, but all the documents are going to be dropped right in here so you can print them out, read them, and use it yourself.